My father-in-law brought a 19-year-old stranger home on a rainy Tuesday in March and told us not to ask questions. His name was Felix. That's all Edmund said. His name is Felix, he's going through a rough patch, and he'll be staying in the east bedroom for a while. Then Edmund picked up the boy's duffel bag himself, walked him down the hall, and closed the door. Craig stood in the kitchen doorway holding a dish towel, staring at the hallway. I watched his jaw tighten, the same way it did whenever his father announced something that wasn't up for debate. The east bedroom wasn't just any room. It was the room where Craig's mother, Helen, had spent the last 4 months of her life. She'd passed 2 years ago from ovarian cancer. Nobody in the family used that room casually. Craig's sister, Stella, had once walked past it and burst into tears for no reason she could name. And now Edmund had put a teenage boy in there without so much as a family meeting. I'm Meredith. I'm 37. I work as the director of human resources at a hospital system outside of Portland, Oregon. I deal with conflict for a living. I read people's body language before they finish their sentences. And standing in that kitchen watching my father-in-law disappear down the hall, every instinct I had said, something is very wrong here. That night at dinner, the three of us sat around Edmund's long oak table, while Edmund ate almost nothing. Felix didn't come out. Edmund ate a plate of food outside the east bedroom door, knocked twice, and came back to the table as if that were completely normal. Craig set his fork down. Dad, who is this kid? Edmund looked up. He was 68, a retired circuit court judge, a man who had spent 40 years presiding over other people's worst moments with perfect composure. He had that same composure now. He's someone who needs help, Edmund said. Leave it at that. Craig pushed back. We can't just leave it at that. Is he in trouble? Does he have family somewhere? Is he? Craig, just the name, that tone. End of discussion. I glanced at my husband. His ears had gone red, which meant he was angrier than he looked. We didn't sleep well that night. Somewhere around midnight, I heard movement from the east bedroom below us. A chair scraping. Then silence. Then what sounded like a cabinet being opened and closed quickly. I told myself it was nothing. A kid getting a glass of water, and eventually drifted off. Stella called the next morning, before I'd even finished my coffee. She'd heard from Craig, and her response was immediate. He's 19, she said. Dad brought home a 19-year-old and put him in Mom's room. Mary, what is happening over there? I told her I didn't know yet. She said she'd be over by noon. She arrived with her husband Darren, which I hadn't been expecting. Darren was 42, a commercial real estate developer, and one of those men who entered a room by evaluating it. He shook my hand when he walked in, smiled warmly, and immediately started asking questions I could tell he'd already prepared. How long is he staying? Darren asked, casual as anything, pouring himself coffee like he lived there. We don't know, Craig said. And Dad won't explain his connection to the family? No. Darren nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they're filing information rather than processing it. Well, that's concerning. It really is. Stella was crying before she'd even sat down. Mom's room, Craig. He put a stranger in Mom's room. That afternoon, Edmund emerged briefly and introduced Felix to all of us. The boy was slight, pale in the way that goes beyond just needing some sun, the kind of pale that comes from being unwell for a long time. He was quiet, kept his eyes low. He shook hands with Craig and then with Stella. When he got to Darren gripped his hand a little too long and held eye contact a little too hard. Felix pulled his hand back first. I noticed the boy had a medical ID bracelet on his left wrist. I was close enough to read part of the condition listed, but he pulled his sleeve down before I could finish. He seems sick, I said quietly to Craig that night. Or scared, Craig said, or both. Over the next few days, the house fell into a pattern that felt deeply wrong. Edmund handled everything for Felix personally. He brought meals to the door. He made phone calls in his study with the door shut, his voice too low to catch. He came and went from the east bedroom at odd hours. When our housekeeper June tried to bring fresh towels down to that end of the hall, Edmund intercepted her in the doorway. I've got it, June. Thank you. June told me later in the kitchen that she'd caught a glimpse of Felix sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. He didn't look like a boy who just needed a place to stay, she said. He looked like a boy carrying something real heavy. Stella came back twice that week. Each time, Darren was with her. And each time, Darren found a way to steer the conversation toward Edmund's estate. I'm just thinking out loud here, he said one evening, sitting across from Craig at the kitchen table, while Stella sat quietly in the living room. Your father is 68. He's not disclosing who this kid is. If something were to happen to Edmund, a medical event, or if someone were to challenge his decisions down the line, it would help enormously to have clarity on the family's financial structure. Who holds power of attorney? How the assets are divided? Craig stared at him. Our father isn't dying, Darren. Of course not, Darren smiled. I'm just being practical. I watched Darren's face carefully. He was always just being practical. Always just looking out for Stella. Always just thinking about the family. The smoother the sentence, the harder it is to trust. I'd learned that working HR, the people who are the most careful with their words, are often the most careful about what they're hiding. On the fourth night, I couldn't sleep. I went downstairs for water at around 1:30 in the morning and noticed light under the door of Edmund's study. I could hear him on the phone, his voice tight and urgent. She needs the imaging results forwarded to Dr. Voss, he was saying. No, the autoimmune panel, all of it, and tell them the insurance situation is being handled. Just don't delay the authorization. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I went back upstairs. The next morning, I pulled the household expense files Edmund asked me to review periodically. I handled his personal finances as a favor, had for years. Buried in February's records were charges I hadn't processed. 2 appointments at a specialty clinic in Eugene, a prescription copay for an immunosuppressant drug, a charge from a medical transport service, and a payment to something called Cascadia Elder Law, not a firm you'd call for estate planning, a firm that handled guardianship cases. I sat at Edmund's desk for a long time, staring at the screen. If Felix was some kid who'd latched onto a lonely older man, none of this made sense. Gold diggers don't require immunosuppressants. They don't need medical transport. They don't generate guardianship paperwork. I asked Edmund point blank the next day. I found him in the kitchen refilling Felix's water pitcher and I said, Dad, is Felix sick? Edmund didn't turn around right away. When he did, his face was closed. He has some health issues. They're being managed. By you, personally. I've arranged for a private physician to consult, Dr. Voss. It's handled. Should I add him to the household insurance? A flicker of something crossed Edmund's face. Gratitude, maybe. Or guilt. Not yet. I'm working on the logistics. He picked up the pitcher and walked away. That evening, I was checking the back porch when I saw Felix standing at the side gate. He was in a gray hoodie, his shoes untied, holding a worn-out backpack against his chest. The gate was unlatched. He was staring at the gap between the fence posts, like he was calculating whether he could make it. Felix. He spun around. His eyes were red. Whatever composure he'd been holding together since he arrived had clearly come apart somewhere between the east bedroom and that gate. Please don't call for him, Felix said, his voice cracked. Please. I don't want his money or anything. I just don't want to be here anymore. I'm making everything worse. I held up my hands. I'm not calling anyone. Talk to me. He took one ragged breath and then sat down hard on the back steps. I sat next to him. After a minute, he unzipped the backpack himself, the way people do when they've been carrying something so long that the relief of showing it outweighs the fear of judgment. Inside, 2 changes of clothes, a prescription bottle, a manila envelope with a medical letterhead, a photograph of a woman in her early 40s, gaunt-faced, smiling anyway. Your mom, I asked. He nodded. She died 6 weeks ago, pancreatic cancer. He said it the way people say things they've said too many times. Flat. Because if you say it flat enough, it almost doesn't hurt. I looked at the photograph. Then I looked at the medical envelope, and something made me glance at the return address. The clinic name matched one of the charges I'd seen in Edmund's records. I didn't say anything about it. We sat there in the cold for a few minutes, and Felix said, very quietly, she made me promise to come here. I didn't want to. I didn't know him, but she said I'd be safe. Before I could ask what he meant, the back porch light came on, and Edmund appeared in the doorway. His face when he saw Felix by the gate stopped me cold. I had never, in 11 years of being married into this family, seen Edmund Whitfield look like that. Like a man who'd just realized how close he'd come to losing something he couldn't name. Come inside, he said. Both of you, please. The please was the part that undid me. Edmund didn't say please, not like that. That night, somewhere around midnight, the screaming started. Craig and I shot up in bed at the same moment. It wasn't a scream like fear, it was pain, sharp and involuntary, the kind that doesn't give you time to decide whether to make noise. Below us, something heavy hit the floor. Then Edmund's voice, muffled but frantic. Craig was already out of bed. "Wait, we don't know what." "I'm not waiting," he said. He was down the stairs before I caught up. Stella had let herself in earlier with a key and was sleeping in the upstairs guest room. She appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, just as Craig reached the east bedroom door. He pressed his thumb to the biometric lock. Red light. Edmund had changed the credentials. He knocked hard. "Dad, open the door, right now." From inside, Felix's voice, barely audible, cutting out between gasps, then silence that was somehow worse than the noise. Craig didn't say anything else. He backed up, and I knew exactly what was about to happen, and I didn't try to stop it this time. He put his shoulder into the door twice. The third time, the frame splintered and the door swung open. What I saw made my legs go unsteady. Felix was on the floor, his back against the bed frame, his body rigid. His hands were clawing at his own forearms, not from fear, but from the involuntary muscle response of a severe autoimmune flare, the kind that takes over a body from the inside out. Edmund was crouched beside him, holding a cold compress to his neck, talking steadily, quietly. On the nightstand, an open medication case, a blood pressure cuff, a small laminated card with emergency instructions printed in large type. On the floor, the water pitcher, shattered. Pills scattered across the hardwood. Stella appeared in the doorway behind us and made a sound I can't describe, not a scream. Something closer to understanding arriving all at once and being too large to contain quietly. Edmund looked up at us. He had aged in the time since dinner. "I've already called Dr. Voss. He's on his way. Please, don't crowd him." Craig didn't move for a long moment. Then he stepped back. I knelt down and started gathering the scattered pills back into the case, just to do something with my hands. Darren appeared at the doorway 30 seconds later. I don't know when he'd arrived. Stella must have called him. He took one look at the room, and then his eyes went straight to the small filing box on the floor beside the desk. It had been knocked over in the chaos. Papers were fanned out across the hardwood. A DNA results sheet on top, a document with a family court header, a handwritten letter on pale green stationery. "What is all of that?" Darren said. His voice was very calm. Edmund didn't answer. Dr. Voss arrived 18 minutes later. He administered medication, stabilized Felix's vitals, and told us in the hallway that the episode was consistent with Felix's condition, and that the boy needed formal outpatient treatment and zero additional stress. When the doctor left, we all moved back into the room. Edmund sat in the armchair by the window. Craig stood across from him. Stella sat on the edge of the bed with one hand resting near Felix's arm, not quite touching him. Like she wasn't sure she had the right yet. "Tell us," Craig said. "All of it." Edmund was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Felix is my son." Stella's hand went to her mouth. 20 years ago, Edmund said, he'd had a brief relationship with a woman named Annette. Not an affair in the way people imagine, but during a stretch when he and Helen had quietly, painfully separated for almost 8 months. Then they reconciled. Edmund ended things with Annette. He had no idea she was pregnant. Annette raised Felix alone in Eugene. She was private, self-sufficient, and she had asked nothing of Edmund for 19 years. But pancreatic cancer moves fast. 3 months before she died, she reached out through a private attorney. She told Edmund about Felix. She told him about the autoimmune disease. Serious, progressive, difficult to manage without stable insurance and specialist care. She told him she was running out of time. She just wanted him safe, Edmund said. She wasn't asking me to be his father. She was asking me to make sure he didn't end up alone and uninsured with a condition that'll kill him if it isn't managed. Craig sat down slowly in the other armchair. He didn't speak for a long time. "The DNA test in that box," he finally said. Edmund nodded. "I did it to be certain before I brought him here. 99.9%. There's no room for doubt." He looked up. "I filed a paternity petition in family court last month, so he can be on my health insurance. So he has legal status." He exhaled. "I was going to tell you when it was official. I was afraid." Stella looked up from the bed. Afraid of what? Edmund looked at his daughter for a long moment. "Afraid you'd think less of your mother. Afraid you'd hate me. And afraid that if I told you he was my son, you'd think he was here to take something from you." Craig gave a short, humorless laugh. So you told us he was a family friend's kid. It was stupid, Edmund said. I thought I could get him stable, get the legal paperwork done, and explain it from a position of, I don't know, facts instead of confession. Stella reached out and put her hand over Felix's. He didn't pull away. The next morning, Darren arrived early. He came with a leather portfolio under his arm and the specific kind of confidence that belongs to people who've prepared something overnight. He sat down across from Edmund at the dining room table and slid a document across the surface. Given everything that came out last night, Darren said, I think the family needs to act quickly. Edmund's paternity petition is going to create uncertainty around the estate. I've drafted a document that gives Stella co-signatory authority over Edmund's investment accounts, just to protect Helen's legacy during the legal process. Craig looked at the document. I looked at it too, because I have a habit of reading the bottom of anything before I read the top. The language on page 3 was the kind of language that sounds like protection and functions as transfer. Co-signatory authority wasn't limited to Edmund's personal accounts. It extended to the family trust, the same trust that held stakes in 3 commercial properties. And the duration wasn't temporary. There was a clause tying the arrangement to full resolution of all pending family court proceedings, which, for a paternity case, could stretch for years. I put the document down. Darren, which firm drafted this? He smiled. A colleague of mine. What kind of colleague? Someone I've worked with on real estate matters. Not an estate attorney? Meredith, this isn't the time to. Whose interests does this actually protect? I asked. He stopped, smiling. Craig took the document from me and read page 3. His expression went from neutral to something very still. I'd spent the previous evening pulling every financial record I could access that touched Darren's business dealings. His development firm had 2 projects in serious distress. One in Salem, one in Bend. He had a gap loan coming due in 5 weeks that I couldn't find a corresponding asset to cover. And 6 months ago, he'd taken out a personal line of credit against Stella's inheritance share. She had co-signed it. I was fairly certain she hadn't understood what she was signing. I laid those records on the table, not dramatically, just set them down. Darren looked at them, then he looked at me. The co-signatory arrangement you drafted, I said, would give you indirect access to the family trust through Stella's authority. You need liquidity in 5 weeks. Edmund's trust has it. Stella turned to look at her husband. That's a significant mischaracterization, Darren said. Is it? He didn't answer immediately. That half-second was enough. Stella stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She said, Give me the portfolio. He started to speak and she said it again, slower. He handed it over. She closed it, held it against her chest and said, I want you to go home. I'll call you later. He left. Nobody stopped him. Nobody called his name. Howard, Edmund's personal attorney, came by that afternoon. He confirmed that the existing estate plan was airtight. Stella's inheritance was not at risk from the paternity proceedings. Felix would be entitled to support and health coverage as a recognized dependent, but Edmund had already structured a separate medical trust for that purpose. What Darren had been trying to get Stella to sign would not have protected her from anything. It would have moved assets she didn't fully know she had into an account he could influence. Stella sat at the kitchen table after Howard left and didn't speak for a long time. June set a cup of tea in front of her. Stella wrapped both hands around it. I sat across from her. You didn't know, I said. I should have. People who love someone aren't always watching for the thing the person loves them for. She looked up. Her eyes were wet. That's a generous way to put it. It's just true. 3 days later, the east bedroom door was left open for the first time. June put a small lamp on the dresser. Felix, well enough to sit up and eat something real, came out for breakfast and stood at the edge of the dining room like he was waiting to be told whether he was allowed to be there. Craig set a plate in front of him without ceremony. You like eggs? Felix nodded. Good. Edmund makes them too dry. I'll cook. That was the whole conversation. But Felix picked up his fork. The paternity paperwork was finalized that week. Felix was added to Edmund's health insurance. An appointment was scheduled with a specialist in Portland who could treat his condition properly, instead of just managing the crises. The evening before that first appointment, Edmund sat in front of Helen's framed photo on the sideboard. The same place it had always been, the same soft smile, The small dish of dried lavender June kept fresh beside it. He didn't say anything. He just sat there with his hands in his lap. I left him to it. Darren filed for divorce 4 months later. The Gap loan defaulted. The Bar Association opened a review into the document he'd drafted and tried to pass off as legitimate estate planning. Howard told us not to expect a fast resolution, but to expect a real one. Felix started community college in the fall. 2 classes, just to see how he felt. He came home one afternoon with a quiz he'd gotten a B+ on and left it on the kitchen counter, in plain sight, like he maybe hoped someone would notice without him having to say anything. Edmund noticed. He put it on the refrigerator with a magnet that had been hanging there since Craig was in 3rd grade. Neither of them made a thing of it. Some things don't need words. Some things just need to be put somewhere visible where the light can reach them. And left there, finally, in the open.